I see you. Oh, wait, I can't see anything. The lenses are being covered. Ah, there we go. Now I can. Welcome back to Super Festival. Once again, I am your host, Jordan Sparks, the Director of Technology here at the Hand-Eye Society, and I'm here to show you some Super Festival goodness with our amazing talks and events. We've got a great show for you tonight, but before that, be sure that you're getting the full Super Festival experience as much as you can, because you can check out at least some of our 4-part hybrid Super Festival event no matter where you are in the world. First, we have the Super Festival website, which you can access at bit.ly/HES-Superfest. Here you can find out all about this week-long event, the 30+ games being featured, all the upcoming talks, and more. Definitely go check that out and discover more games. The second part is, of course, the Twitch show that you are watching, which will be every day from 6 to 9 p.m. Toronto time, aside from Sunday, which will be 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. Follow us to find out when we go live, and also check out the Super Festival website for more details on the schedule. The third part is the return of our legendary Torontron arcade machines. If you're in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can visit several venues in the city throughout the week to play some of the Super Festival featured games on location. Finally, there's the return of our famous Hand-Eye Society Ball, our fancy party for the Toronto game dev community, happening this Saturday, November 30th at 6 p.m. in Toronto. It's sure to be a fun time, but don't wait. Tickets are limited, and as of now, they're almost sold out. If you're in Toronto, be sure to grab a ticket and join us there. This is our 3rd annual Super Festival, and it is once again stacked with amazing talent. However, we wouldn't have been able to do it without all of our amazing sponsors. So thank you to Ontario Creates, the City of Toronto, the Province of Ontario, the Toronto Arts Council, the Ontario Arts Council, and the Canada Council for the Arts, as well as our studio sponsors Clever Endeavor and Stella Maris. Thank you so much for your support. Well, that's it from me. I'll be back later, but for now, let's get our game on and enjoy today's talks and games. Happy Super Festival, everyone!
Believe me, go straight till the morning, no lie, we won't wait. And we're taking everything we want and we can do it all straight. We ain't stopping, believe me, go straight till the morning, no lie, we won't wait. And we're taking everything we want and we can do it all straight. No sweat, all straight.
Inside every creator lies a guiding star, a unique vision waiting to illuminate the world. At Stella Maris, we're not just a partner, we're your compass. With tailored mentorship, essential tools, and unwavering support, we nurture your brilliance. Discover your path, unleash your creativity, and let your star shine brightly.
Let's just go for a mullet. You know, and that looks great, honestly. Good job. You look great. Next. Okay, we got some of these. What the hell does this do? Oh, okay, curls it. Well, that's great. We got one of these guys that just kind of blows it around, I guess. All right. Oh, goodbye. What am I supposed to do with this? Okay, we're gonna have to just clean some of this up. Honestly, not sure if we're gonna get that fixed. Probably best to just cut off a bunch of it, I think. Oh god, the hair is getting everywhere. It's all over my shop. Ugh. Okay, well, let's shave you kind of just on one side and, yeah, just everywhere. Okay, get out of here. Really gotta figure out how to turn these off. Ultra clutch hair cement. Okay, here you are. Let's curl left side, colors. Good enough. Next! What's it gonna be this time? You have too much hair. We can...
Wait, you know what I want to do?
What? What do you think it would be about?
If they made our lives a movie, it would be boring.
刺武汉火车票一张。
我要去武汉，我是为了先买米饭。
武汉只让进不让出现在。
武汉不是
不进也不能进了，你们俩先往这边。辣呢？辣呢？
Hello, how are you? Hey, it's you. I'm saying hi to you. Can you see me? I'm over here, on the left side of the screen. Oh, you want to interview me? Okay. Well, my daily job is just waiting here. Boring? Maybe a little bit. Oh, what, my dream? To go to Coney Island. I wanted to go to the beach, enjoy my vacation life. I've always wanted to know what swimming feels like. It must be different from getting drenched in the rain, right? But I know I can never get there. I'm just a trash can. I think I might spend my whole life here on 363 Lafayette Street. Huh? Is this a balloon? How did you know that yellow is my favorite color? Thank you. Hey, come back. Wait, I'm not done yet. Wait, come back. Wait a second. I feel like I feel something different. I feel like my body's getting lighter. Wait, am I finally going to Coney Island?
All straight, we ain't stopping, believe me. Go straight till the morning, no lie, we won't wait. And we're taking everything we wanted, we can do it. All straight, we ain't stopping, believe me. Go straight till the morning, no lie, we won't wait. And we're taking everything we wanted, we can do it. All straight, no sweat. All straight.
Inside every creator lies a guiding star, a unique vision waiting to illuminate the world. At Stella Maris, we're not just a partner, we're your compass. With tailored mentorship, essential tools, and unwavering support, we nurture your brilliance. Discover your path, unleash your creativity, and let your star shine brightly.
Hi everyone, I'm really chuffed to be here this year as part of the Super Festival. Thank you so much for having me. I hope you enjoy my talk, Tips to Make Programming Your Game Less Hellish. So what is this talk trying to do? So how to program better is a really big topic, and there is so much I could cover in this space. In writing this, I reflected a lot on when I started as a programmer. Back then, I wrote a lot of bad code, and I remember really struggling to understand why and feeling like I wasn't given feedback that really helped. For example, I was told I should keep my files shorter, which is not bad advice, but also didn't get to the heart of what was wrong with my code. I could write really bad code in short files. So now I'm more experienced, I wanted to give a talk that would have helped me back then. It's very tempting to give dogmatic advice along the lines of if you do this, then things will be better. But this was exactly the advice I hated as a beginner. So I've tried to analyze and make a case for what makes code better or worse. And while I will give some specific principles, my goal with this is to give you a barometer for thinking about your code in a more general way, outside of specific principles. Evidently, this talk is aimed at programmers who are earlier in their career, although I hope I also make it accessible to people coming from other disciplines. For those in the audience who are experienced programmers, it will probably be more of a refresher, but I hope I managed to present it in a way that's still enjoyable. I've certainly enjoyed making this. So, a bit about me. So, I'm founder of Scribblescape, a tiny games consultancy. I come in and help game studios on programming and help them work out how feasible different roadmaps are given the code-based budget timeline and present them back to the studio. I've been a programmer for about 10 years. I've spent 6 years in tech, working on a range of things, from educational technology to get kids coding, validating mobile train tickets and integrating the software with ticket barriers in stations, and worked also on the back end of a big e-commerce website. I was also a bit in the software crafter community, specifically Socrates, an organization that holds wonderful events about how to improve your programming skills. The games I've worked on are indie games made in small teams or solo. The two on the left are part of Queensguard, a team of about 6 people from all over the world. We made our first as part of Cartomancy Anthology, an ambitious project of 22 games made and shipped in 6 months. We have since been working on a sequel called Shards Between Us. I also, for the past year, have been part of the Astra Fellowship, which was a wonderful program that gave me a year to explore making thinky games. Games that are about puzzles, strategy, genres that are about planning and thinking rather than reaction time or skill with the joystick. During that fellowship, I was prototyping various cozy gardening strategy games. Finally, the last game on this list is Cracks, a relationship platformer, and the game that kickstarted my journey into games. So the takeaways from this are that my experience in tech has been quite diverse. I've worked from small to big companies, while in games it's been more small teams and indie, and I think that's important to contextualize this talk. So let's jump into the meat of the talk. So what is bad code? Because there are a lot of different facets we can focus on. Performance, whether it's buggy or brittle. I'm only going to talk about 2 aspects today, 2 that I think are the most interesting because I think they're the ones that follow you across your career. I've tried to pick aspects to talk about that are somewhat technology agnostic, as I want this talk to be relevant for people who use a variety of game engines. But I will be talking about object-oriented code because that is where my experience lies. And the 2 facets I want to focus on are code that is hard to understand and code that is hard to change. It's clear that code can be hard to change because it's hard to understand, but it's not the only reason. And we can be less judgmental here. It's hard to write code that you can understand, and it's hard to write code you can change. So let's go through the first one. It's hard to write code you can understand. So let's zoom out a bit. What is code? Does it even matter anymore now we have AI? And I really like this quote, so I'm going to read it out. We will never be rid of code because code represents the details of the requirements. At some level, those details cannot be ignored or abstracted, they have to be specified. And specifying requirements in such detail that a machine can execute them is programming. Such a specification is code. So this was written in 2009 in clean code, but it feels very appropriate today with the rise of AI coding tooling. For years, we've been talking about generating code so anyone can program. I think this reasoning is very insightful because it quickly gets to the heart of difficulty with coding. There is a level of detail that is unavoidable. When you use a tool like Unity, it doesn't raise the level of detail, it writes large swathes of code for you. Did they build the thing you need for you or not? Is there a component that already fulfills your needs? But the precision doesn't change. The computer will do exactly what you tell it to, even if you don't yet know what it should do. You don't get to be hand-wavy or vague when you program. You have to make decisions so your intent is unambiguous. Even if we end up interfacing with AI in order to code, we still need to be able to instruct the AI with enough precision that the AI will generate the code we need. As our problems become more specific to our code base, we need to instruct with more precision, understanding our increasingly specific problems well enough in order to generate code that solves it is still coding. So when we program games, we're operating across two levels of detail. The high-level product-focused version of what the moment-to-moment gameplay is, what the emotions are that we want the player to have, and then we have the high-precision, detailed, unambiguous instructions. Perhaps this captures the scale of the problem. I hypothesize that it's very easy to create a codebase that can't fit in your head because of having to operate at this level of precision. The metaphor I'd like to use is going through a codebase, particularly a new codebase, is like traveling through a dark mansion with a torch. You can only see a certain amount at any one time under the torchlight. The torchlight represents your short-term memory or your working memory, and what you can see is what you understand of the details of the codebase you're working on. And so with this, I'd like to propose a new definition for good readable code. And that is, good code leaves your working memory free to solve your problem. You can't make a game in a day, and so you need to aggregate your work over time, and your job as a programmer is to handle this snowballing complexity. The code you wrote yesterday should help you solve your problem today, and the code you write today should help you solve your problem tomorrow. And so as time goes on, and you've written a wealth of functionality to help you build your game, it should become clear that your code's readability is really important, because how else will you leverage all that work you've done over the last week, month, or year? I hope it's clear then that in an established codebase, code is read much more often than it is written. A lot of intuitive optimizations increase the speed of producing code, but actually the bottleneck in coding is your comprehension of the code that's already there, at least outside of a game jam. You don't want to relearn how you implemented a function yesterday to use it today. So my first tip is that you should know how to use a function from just the function signature. If you don't need to change that function, you shouldn't have to look inside, and that leads us to the importance of naming. In this presentation, when we're looking at code, we'll be using Godot script notation. So to quickly take you through how a function signature would look, here you have func and then the function name, and then for the parameters you have the name first and then the type. And right at the end of the function you have the return type for the function. The types in Godot script are optional, and the order is the opposite of what you might expect from C#. So let's start with this function, possibly deliberately named in a slightly obscure way. So what can we tell just by looking at the function signature? Well, not very much. The name doesn't give much away. It says get, but I have no information about the return type. It could be that the developer has omitted it because it's optional in Godot, or perhaps it doesn't have one. I will have to inspect the function to find out. So on line 12, we see this variable rv that is then returned on line 16. So we are indeed returning a variable, and it is some sort of list, although we don't yet know what. So we add to our questions, what does this result mean? Why do I want it? Now on line 13, we're iterating over the elements of the list. Now, the list is not identified as a parameter nor as a variable instantiated in this function, but this function is in a class, so it's probably a member variable. So perhaps the type of this member variable can help me. So I look around in the file to see where this is defined. Unfortunately, the developer before me did not specify the type. So we add to our questions, what does the list mean? And we continue with our code. If we skip a line to line 15, we see that the elements from the underscore list are added to the return value of the function. So the list and the return type of this function are the same. So this function is some sort of filter of the underscore list based on this condition on line 14. So what can we glean from this condition? If I just read it out, it's something like the first element of the list equals to O. This is a bit opaque. This tells us that the data we're dealing with is a nested array. So we do have a bit more type information, but we don't, again, really understand the meanings of these. It's a bit of an obscure interaction that we're having right now. So we can add more questions. What does O mean? What is the significance of the first element of this array? So now I tell you that this is about Game of Life. So in Game of Life, every turn, each cell is either dead or alive, depending on how many neighbors it has. The black cells are alive and the white cells are dead. If you're not familiar with it, it was a mathematical model to model single-cell organisms. So now with this additional context, let's go back to the function and see how we could have named things more appropriately. The function name was getThem, which was deliberately stupid, but now it is getAlive_cells, which is a lot more informative. We can also see that the return value is named to fit with the function name on lines 12 and 16. The return type is also explicit. We can see it's a nested array. Sadly, I don't think we can do any better with Godot, and we can't get information about the type of the nested array yet. The member variable, the list, is now game board. I've also been explicit here and added self, which is useful to show where it comes from, particularly if your editor doesn't highlight member variables differently from function level variables. And finally, I've added meaning to the constants we saw before. So now our check on line 14 has more context. So this is a lot better than it was before. So are we done? So we said before that the aim was to understand the function from the function signature alone. And can we do that? And the answer is nearly, kind of. We now know why we're calling this and what the meaning of the data we're getting back is, but this nested array is still a bit impenetrable. We will likely have to inspect some functions implementation in order to understand how to use this data structure, like that alive check we did before. So if we look at that check again, and we gave it meaning, we would say the check is checking the cells alive. Since we're in object-oriented land, we can put that data in a class and use methods to explain the meaning of interactions with that data. And that would make the code look like this. So now we have this value object called cell, which is just the same nested array that we saw before, but rather than interacting with the raw data directly to get this isAlive check, I've written a method. And I hope you can see how big a difference that this makes. When I was using that method, it didn't really matter to me the implementation of how I interact with this data structure in order to get that result. I only really wanted that Boolean, and the how didn't really matter. And so this has kind of taken away that mental load from me. Not only that, this works a lot more nicely with my editor. If I have an object of type cell and I type cell dot, my editor will show me a list of all the possible functions I can call at that point. I have essentially written my own documentation now. So another interesting thing to think about is power. How much power does a programmer have in different parts of the code base? So I'm going to give a slightly labored example, and I hope you bear with me. So I'm going to make the analogy that the data structure that we had before for a cell is a bit like an electronics board. And the check that we wanted to do to check that the cell was alive is like fiddling with this electronics board to try and get a certain LED to light up. In the second example with the refactoring, you're given a helpful informatic with the electronics board that shows you which is the right button to press to get that check. The final refactoring that we did put the electronics board behind a button, and now the only thing you can do is push the button. Now this improves the UX, but you can see how that is tied with removing control from the user. I mean, when you had the electronics board before, you could have done something very strange with it. You could do the wrong thing, kind of by accident, but you could also do something evil. You could take off a resistor. In the case we had before, you could add data to that array, data that you might then write logic in another function to listen for, and have a very quiet, secret communication channel through your code that would be very impenetrable to the next developer. You have a tremendous amount of power, perhaps too much power. And so it's interesting to think of kind of how much power different bits of your code base should have. Not every bit of code should have all the power to do everything. So after our last refactoring, if we inspect the signature again, I think it's a lot more clear what this function does now. So the tips are to use your return types even when optional and make your types informative. Don't be scared to wrap your data in a class to give it meaning. And wrapping your data in a class can happen when you have some obscure interaction that is difficult to remember, but it can also be when data comes together in clumps. So if you have the same 3 parameters that are being passed around a bunch of functions and they're all needed to make the player look a certain way, maybe that is actually a class. So I'm going to mention code duplication, which is a massive topic, but I think it's really interesting because it sounds deceptively simple. Some people call it the root of all evil in programming. So let's go back to the example we've been talking about, probably too much now, but this kind of array type and this check that we've been doing on whether a cell is alive. So besides readability, the problem with this strange array type really manifests depending on how many places I need this information and whether I need to update it in future. So imagine I decide that this game really needs a concept of sick cells. However, by adding this sick option to the enum, alive probably becomes now healthy, and now my alive check is broken, because to be alive you need to be healthy or sick. Clearly, how big a problem this is depends on how many places you've done this check, or variations of this check, because it's more work and there's also more places you could miss changing it back, leaving you with a really annoying bug to track down. So this is what people normally think of as code duplication. It's copy and pasted lines of code in multiple places in a codebase. But it's not only that. So duplication is not just duplications of lines, it's duplication of meaning. So here I have two functions, getSize and isEmpty. Now even though they are two functions, you can see that they overlap in meaning. If size is 0, then isEmpty should return true. So if I track isEmpty with a different variable, you can see I've duplicated this concept of being empty. So duplication can come then from not understanding your existing concepts very well and re-implementing existing logic. You can see then how duplication can arise from a codebase that is hard to understand. The flip side of this is that, or the trade-off with removing duplication, is that removing duplication connects things or couples things together. When you create a function which gets called in several places, it's because those places have some common need. When you create a class that hides some state, it gives some meaning to that grouping, and so you create an abstraction. The problem then is when you create an incorrect abstraction. This is more likely earlier in a project because the feature set to make a fun game is still being discovered, and everything looks a lot more similar. So an abstraction that was correct might stop being correct with the new features. This can be worse than duplication because the abstraction is declaring that the code is doing something that it actually isn't doing, and that makes it harder to understand the true behavior of the code. A clear example of strong coupling is any sort of class inheritance, where the child class automatically inherits any change made to the parent class. It marches in lockstep with its parent. This is great if they should be tightly coupled, but there's a risk that they only look similar when they were both simple. Interestingly, the use of inheritance in games is the biggest difference that I've noticed between games and tech. In tech, I remember it was incredibly frowned upon to use class inheritance, and we were always told composition over inheritance, while in game dev I see it incredibly frequently, and it's not a judgment, I still haven't worked out kind of what I think about it or why there is such a difference. But I think it's very interesting that there is such a clear divide. It is such a difference in, coding culture. Code duplication is a really big topic, and I've only touched the surface. For now, I'm going to go back to function naming and creating a better UX in your code. So let's talk about patterns you can use to help yourself. So the following are words frequently used in function names. Can you work out which one is the odd one out? To just go through them quickly in case you've not seen all of these before, get normally returns a field in a class, set normally overrides a field, is a true or false statement, and has normally asks if a collection contains a particular element. And so the answer here then is set, because it's the only one that should return void. You could also say it's the only one that should mutate state. This makes sense. If something returns nothing, what else can it be doing other than mutating data? Conversely, if you return something and you have a side effect, that side effect is hard to communicate in the function signature, and so you're putting the burden on the next developer to know something about the implementation of this function. There's a principle called command query separation that says that this pattern should hold everywhere for every function that you write. So it was devised by Bertrand Meyer as part of his pioneering work on the Eiffel programming language. It says that every function should be a command or a query. Commands perform actions or change the state of a system. So this is known as either modifier or mutators. Queries return data, so return a result, but no method should do both. By doing this, we should better communicate intent. To show this, let's look at another example. So if we look at this code, if set username Caroline, There's a couple of things we might think it does. Maybe it sets the username and then returns true or false depending on if it succeeded. Or maybe it tells you if the username is already set to Caroline. So now if I tell you in this case, it checks if there's a username field and if so, sets it to Caroline. Then if we use something like command query separation, we could write our code like this. So we check first if the attribute username exists and then we set it to Caroline. And you can see the argument to say that this reads a lot better. There are some common exceptions to this that you might have come across. So often there's a pop method on array lists where the pop mutates the array that you're operating on and also returns the value. And in Unity, there's this add component, which again mutates the game object that you're operating on and automatically returns the component, because I guess it's so common to have get component straight afterwards. So I would say that these examples show that this isn't I wouldn't consider this a dogmatic principle. I wouldn't use this blindly, but it's good to be aware of. I would also add that if you violate command query separation, I would advise that your function looks more like a command than a query, and that it clearly says that by calling it you are mutating state, rather than silently mutating state in a function that looks like a query. I think that's a lot more likely to lead to some problems. So we've talked about that it's hard to write code that you can understand. Now let's talk about why it's hard to write code you can change and how you can work on that. So, do you know your game works when a new person has joined your team and is working on your codebase? What about when you port to a new platform? What about when you add a new feature or make changes to the code? So imagine you have a showcase in an hour. You've just spent all night fixing bugs and you need to decide which build to showcase. You know the press are going to be at the stall this morning. Do you pick an old build with some really annoying bugs but which aren't game-breaking? Or a new build that you haven't yet had time to test? It would be really nice to be confident your new build doesn't have a game-breaking bug in it, wouldn't it? And I think it's really helpful to think in terms of feedback loops. So if I push a bug to a game, how quickly can I discover the bug? The sooner I find that bug, the quicker it is to locate the source of that bug, because there are fewer code changes that could have caused it. Also, the fresher that change is in your memory, so the easier it is to understand the code. Also, QA is expensive, particularly in a small team. Often, if someone's doing QA in indie, they're not a full-time QA, they're an artist or a programmer that have dropped what they would otherwise be doing in order to test the game. And so, if you can manage to minimize the amount of QA, then the more time people can spend on what they're actually good at and love doing towards the game. So let's follow up on the scenario we had before. So you've decided to pick your new build to show at the showcase. You watch someone playing. On exiting the third level, the game shows a blank screen. Huh? You check your codebase and replay it. On the end of the third level, you see an exception, level load exception cannot find level -4. You double check your files. Turns out it's called level _4. These types of exceptions are the worst because they're very time consuming to find. And so we can rate errors based on feedback loops. So how long does it take to find these errors, and also how confident are we when we ship our game whether these errors are present? When I say errors, I really mean crashes. I mean anything that stops the game playing. So the player is going to have a bad time with this. It's not a cute speedrunning bug. So runtime errors, if you've done any sort of programming, you've probably had a null pointer exception. You've had that experience where the error takes you by surprise. You have to do a very large amount of testing in order to be confident that there is no runtime errors in your project. And I think we've become very used to this, the idea that we are not that protected against runtime exceptions, that is kind of normal. So if runtime errors are bad, and I'm using error and exception interchangeably here, then what's the best type of error? And that would be a compiler error, because you cannot build the game without knowing that you have a problem. It tells you instantly where that problem is. Like, imagine every exception you had was actually a compiler error. You could build your game and ship it and be confident that it would never crash. So unfortunately, we don't live in that world, but we can try and do things to leverage our compiler. So the problem that I had on the last slide, where you have a function that can it can take a large amount of parameters, but most parameters will make it crash, right? There's only a limited number of valid states that it has. Then I would use an enum or I would have the public function that the rest of the code kind of accesses through with this enum. And then behind the scenes, it would map this enum to the string or into whatever it needs. And that works a lot better with the compiler, right? No one can do kind of a strange typo. It also works nicely with the Unity editor because you get a nice drop-down list, which still has useful information on it. And then a compromise on these are fail-fast errors. So you can start the game and it crashes, basically. So you can build it, but as long as you launch it, you should still know that there's something wrong. So an example of where you might use this is if you have some JSON configuration for your game, and you could either check when the data is valid, like when you need to use it, which is closer to a runtime error, or you could validate it right at the start of your game. So what's interesting about this comparison is that it feels counterintuitive because I'm saying that your game should scream if it's broken. The game should make it so clear to even a superficial QA inspection that something is wrong. And I think it feels better to us when the game appears to work, right? If it's 50%, if there's like a few runtime errors, then kind of it should indicate that it's kind of working to us. But I think our intuition leads us astray there. And here I would bring up automated testing. So automated testing, or tests for short, are pieces of code that error very loudly when something in your code isn't working as it should or as it used to. And I would make the comparison here with the fast fail errors. While these aren't errors, these tests kind of function in the same way, right? You run them and they tell you whether your code's working or not. So these are really good to see if a new feature has changed old behavior of your code. And the trade-off is then that if the behavior of your code is changing a lot, then your tests will need a lot of updating. In some ways, the readability of your test code is almost more important than the readability of your source code. If your test code, if you can't understand what it's testing, then it becomes virtually useless when it breaks. So test code does have a maintenance cost. It's not like easy and it's not free, but it does really shine in the later parts of development where you have a lot of code with behavior that you want to preserve. I have a mentor who has a script which loads every level in his game and takes a screenshot, and he can do that across different platforms to check that the shaders are working as expected. Test suites are really good for helping bring new people onto a project. For one, it kind of proves that it gives confidence that the code runs on that person's machine or on that setup, and it gives them a way to understand if their new feature has changed the code. I mean, that's the case for everyone, but particularly a new developer who might not have an intuition for the right manual testing to check a feature, automated testing is a lifesaver. But we can also consider this feedback loop in development. So in the previous slide, when I talked about automated testing, I was ambiguous about when you write these tests. Perhaps you write them after you've created your feature. They still create a lot of benefit then. But I could also write the tests before I've created the feature. The advantage of this is that it shortens my feedback loop during the development of the feature. If the alternative for me finding out if my feature works is lots of debugging during development or manual playtesting, then the presence of a test will speed me up tremendously, not just in sheer time, but also context switching. So a time when I found this very useful is when doing something in Queensguard in Castle of Glass. So we have this ivy that spreads every time that glass moves about the board. And this had a lot of bugs dependent on the shape of the environment that the ivy was spreading over. And so in order to solve this problem, I created tests. I created lots of mini environments of different geometries that the environment could be, and then tested the ivy spreading across all of those. And it worked. I developed this feature in about a week to 2 weeks. I can't quite remember. But I remember being like it not having any problems at the end of it. And I'm convinced that the feedback loop, the cycle time for that feature would have been way longer had I not used automated testing. So we've talked a bit about how to program and account for change in your codebase, and I would like to flip some of these ideas. So if it's hard to write code that you can change, can we write code that doesn't need to change as much? So this advice is now like aimed at smaller teams and smaller projects. If your brain is anything like my brain, then your brain is a dirty, sneaky liar about what is fun. As a creative endeavor, you generally try and make stuff that is different to what already exists. But if it's different, then you don't know if it will work. Fun is not particularly intuitive, and it can take a long time to find. The most helpful thing that someone said to me about games is that video games aren't really the tangible thing that you're creating on the screen. I know it's like digital and not super tangible, but what you're actually creating is even less tangible. It's an experience that someone's having. The game is in someone's head. What you're really creating, particularly the types of games that I'm interested in, are the emotions that it creates in the player. And so I don't have a high hit rate with the stuff that I create or what I think will create that emotion in people's heads. I need a lot of playtesting to kind of confirm that they feel what I was hoping that they would feel. So you have this period during game development where you're just trying a lot of things and you don't quite know what will work, and you're just trying it as fast as possible. So a consequence is that your attempts to find the fun will contain lots of scars of half-built features that you don't need, workarounds, an imported asset for something that you actually need more control of. And the earlier you can identify the fun bits, the more you can start your codebase with a clear idea of your game, and then the easier your life will be. And so I recommend that you throw away your prototypes. At the start of this presentation, I mentioned cracks in passing, and for that project I did not do this. I did not throw away my prototypes. In that project, I thought I could code my way out of a design problem. I filled my demo with so many ideas, many of which weren't fun, and ultimately the codebase became really painful with, and the project was shelved. And with this, I'll present the idealized roadmap, which I haven't personally experienced, but I theorize that the closer you are to this, then the better your life will be. So you have two very clear stages of development: pre-production and production. Pre-production, the idea is to iron out everything that will go in your game. So you have your fun idea, and at the end of pre-production, you have answered the questions. I have identified what mechanics I need to build to make my fun idea. I confirm many other people find my idea fun, and I have evidence that people would buy my fun idea. And at that point, you throw away the codebase and you start again, probably. And then production, you do not add any features that were not decided in pre-production. Now, this is idealized, and I recognize that part of that reason is financial. You're much more likely to get funding for a game that's in production and not pre-production because it's seen as a lot less risky. And so I think a lot of devs are pushed out of pre-production too early into production in order to raise the funds they need to make the game that they want to make. So I understand that this is not necessarily realistic, but I think this is the world that we should attempt to try and live in as much as possible. There's two very clear kind of stages of development, and they both need very different things from programming, right? I think in pre-production, if things are very experimental, then you shouldn't over-engineer. That's going to cause you more problems because you're going to create kind of abstractions that don't age well. While in production, if you have full access to the possible feature set that's going to be in the game, that clarity is so helpful to engineering. In production, the problem is more content creation rather than what are the features that will make a fun experience. And so you're focusing more on editor tooling and creating a fast iteration loop for the specific levels. So I'm going to give some evidence or some examples to kind of back up why I feel like this is a good idea. So Mark Brown, he has a development series called Developing. This is the guy who runs GameMaker's Toolkit. And after his 30-day challenge of making a bunch of levels and getting a lot of feedback, he starts again, focusing on improving the tooling to create his levels and a new character. To test his editor tools, he was making levels and ends up creating tools that are so easy to use that towards the end of the episode, he says, "Did I accidentally make a video game?" Because he'd made it so easy to create levels. And once he knew the things he wanted to build, and having done it wrong the first time round, he knew how to make his life really easy the second time round. One thing that struck me in this series is how late he threw away his code. He did it much later than I expected, or would have done myself, and it's a really interesting question as to when that's the right thing to do. For him, again, it only worked once he had decided on his core feature set. I do not suggest that you throw away a code base that is bad when you still haven't decided on your core feature set, because probably the reason it's bad is because you've been changing it a lot, and if you haven't decided your core feature set, then you're going to change the next code base a lot. So this only works once you have signed a contract in blood that says that I will not change my features too much. I also think this series in general is great to watch because he makes a video game in like a relatively short period of time. I can't quite remember exactly how long, like a year, maybe 2. But that's including the time it takes to learn Unity. So it's a very inspiring series. Go and watch it if you haven't already. I would also encourage people to think of validating your game ideas outside of a game engine through paper prototyping or other ways. I think personally, as someone who likes to code, I notice in myself that it can feel unproductive to sit with a game idea and try and design it outside of a screen. And sometimes I am pulled towards programming because that feels like it's pushing the game forward more. But if ultimately the game is built on a bad idea, then I will have to throw it all away. So an example where this worked really well for me was the Cartomancy anthology project Castle of Glass. I worked with a game designer and he prototyped everything in Tabletop Simulator. So he built the levels with these kind of wooden blocks, and then he would screen share and get people to play it, and he would instruct them what the rules were, and he would control the player and kind of tell them what they were allowed to do, and then they would verbally control him. And in this way we were able to test all the puzzles before I had coded anything. That was a wonderful, we ended up shipping this project in 6 months from start to finish, with 12 levels that I think had a really satisfying difficulty curve. Inkle Studios a few years ago released this game Overboard, which is about a wife pushing her husband overboard a cruise ship and then trying to get away with his murder. And it's a classic choose your own adventure with a slight twist of you kind of replay the story over and over until you can kind of get away with it fully. Now, Inkle Studios are in like an unusual position that most of us won't find ourselves in right now. They've spent the past decade making these narrative games, and they've created all these tools that they can use now to leverage making their games faster. And this was them trying to make a game as fast as possible. Saying that, they have also open sourced a lot of these tools. So Overboard was made with Inky, and it has a nice integration into Unity, and I think now Unreal. So I encourage you to try it, to prototype some of your own ideas if that kind of thing sounds interesting to you. And I want to leave you with the thought that your code base is both your game and your journey to making the game. I think it's really interesting to think about how a code base would look different if you made the same game twice. Navigating a changing feature set, building the right boundaries in your code to protect and separate logic, and finding the right abstractions to explain what your code is actually doing are all really interesting problems that we as programmers have. And my final piece of advice for you, if you want to make making your game less hellish, is if you don't have a game designer, get a game designer, because the clarity of your game vision, I think, ultimately has the biggest impact on your code base. And that is not a programming problem now, that is a design problem. Thank you for watching my talk. If you want to get in touch, my email's hi@scribblescape.com. It's been so much fun. Thank you for having me.
creator lies a guiding star, a unique vision waiting to illuminate the world. At Stella Maris, we're not just a partner, we're your compass. With tailored mentorship, essential tools, and unwavering support, we nurture your brilliance. Discover your path, unleash your creativity, and let your star shine brightly.
a new family. Adventure beyond the safety of your home and confront what lies in waiting. Defend your flock from the perils of this world, but don't be late. For dinner, forage, fish, and farm to stock your pantry. Improve your home and tend to your flock, but look out for Shub. He takes quick to a love potion. Guide your flock through this world, for you are not alone. You shall... Hush, please, I'm doing something. You shall... What do you want? Oh, you want to say it together? Well, all right. You shall not pause.
In this corner, Punch Facer. And in this corner, Tim.
And it's over! Sorry, folks, but the only rule is kill here at Blood Dome 99! Use this gun! Use more guns! Use whatever this is! Use guns to shoot the infinite ineffable mystery of our own spiral galaxy! Earn more money so you can spend more money on more upgrades, or weapons, or arenas, or pitiful dog. But don't spend too much. You still have to buy your freedom! Into the Blood Dome, choose your weapon, and fight to escape the future of 1999! Available now in early access.
big gun. What's she gonna? What's she gonna do? The big gun. What's she gonna? What's she gonna do? The big gun. Where's she gonna? Where's she gonna go? The big gun. Where's she gonna? Where's she gonna go? Ali's mom is in trouble with a really bad guy. Ricky's gotta have his money and her purse was dry. So Ali's taking grift lessons from a guy named Ted. And she's skipping out of band camp. Adventure instead. So get ready for adventure and see Ali pull off. The big gun. Give me my money. Give me my bag. The big gun. Give me money. Give me my bag. Step one, Ali test those skills. Big pocketing is tricky, but she gotta get those bills. If Ted thinks she can handle it, I'll bring her along. He's got a job in Las Vegas. And what could go wrong? So get ready for adventure and see Ali pull off.
Talking, sneaking, hustling away to the end. Ali's got what it takes. Faking, disguising, joking, cross the country with Ted till he raises the stakes. Till he raises the stakes. Hop a train, cause you won't go the line. Get the cash to save the video store. Find a payphone, check in on your mom. Get the cash to save the video store. Get the cash to save the video store. Get the cash, save the video store. So get ready for adventure and see Ali pull off. The big gun. Hootin' doo, hootin' doo ah. The big gun.
every creator lies a guiding star, a unique vision waiting to illuminate the world. At Stella Maris, we're not just a partner, we're your compass. With tailored mentorship, essential tools, and unwavering support, we nurture your brilliance. Discover your path, unleash your creativity, and let your star shine brightly.
Yo, party people in the house, let's go! Hope everyone is enjoying Super Festival so far and are really having a lot of fun hearing about all the amazing talks and seeing all the amazing games. We are once again live to you, and I can see y'all to to present a new live talk. Hey, Mr. Mr. Big Pants, you are indeed a party person. Yes. So, personally, as a game maker, what fascinates me is the potential of great and sometimes understated potential of games to teach us about the world, as well as explore different peoples, cultures, and histories. Games can be a very powerful way to engage with many subjects that enrich our perspectives, and that is a view that is shared by our next speaker. So, here to speak about games as cultural bridges and how they foster collaboration through their game Hawk and Puma, please give a warm Hand-Eye Society welcome to Nico Valdivia Hennig.
Thank you so much, Jordan, for such a wonderful introduction. Hi, everyone. And first of all, I wanted to thank to everyone in the Hand-Eye Society and to hope my best for this awesome Super Festival 2024. Thank you for having me. And today, I'm going to be sharing some thoughts about what's this thing on thinking about games as cultural bridges, in this particular, in the experience on making Hawk and Puma, a game that I'm going to be sharing more about, and through this whole process that I've been exploring on research creation through games. So to start, let me introduce myself. So I'm Nico. I'm Nico Valdivia Hennig. Uh, I'm a award-winning Chilean game designer, ludic activist, cultural studies researcher with a decade of experience, and so on and so on and so on. Like those are like the classical bios. But today, what I wanted to share, it's like mainly the three principal hats that I'm having here and that I'm going to be using when sharing about this particular project. First of all, I'm the co-founder at Niebla Games. It's a studio based in Valparaíso, Chile. We've launched board games and video games. We've been along like for over a decade, and also I'm a PhD candidate. So I'm doing my PhD in the University of California in Riverside. So that's also an important hat to consider when understanding like this whole process on making Hook and Puma. And lastly, my hat as co-founder at Rio Junto Art Collective, an art um, a platform based in Southern California. So basically, it's like I'm a game designer, I'm a PhD candidate, so I'm a game studies researcher, and also I'm an artist and cultural producer. Okay. So with that in mind, I bring you the experience on Hawk and Puma. Hawk and Puma, it's a game about the indigenous chronicler Waman Poma, and I'm going to be talking a lot about the game and a lot about Waman. But just to be in the same page, I'm going to share a short video about this minimal game. So this is a game with a minimalistic approach made with Bitsy that also I'm going to be sharing more. But just to let you know, like this small game has been circulating in different art and cultural spaces and venues. For example, Hawk and Puma has been nominated for international awards like the Explorer Award at the Amaze Festival Berlin for playful and experimental media, interactive media. Also, Hawk and Puma has been finalist in the Gamescom Latam, or like the big festival Brazil in Sao Paulo, for the categories of social, big impact on social matters, and also big impact on diversity. So we're like really proud on what the game has been achieving, even though it's a small piece that now I'm going to share more. So let's see a video all together. Okay, so it's 1 minute. Stick with me. So that's a glimpse on. Oops. So this is how this minimal game looks like. So just a presentation overview. I'm going to go over what's research creation or what's my take on this particular approach. I'm going to be talking about Wamampoma, this indigenous chronicler that whose work and life it's the referential work to create this particular piece. Nueva Crónica y Buen Gobierno, that it's the name of the work of Woman, and a glimpse on the colonial theory for you to understand this research, creation, and theoretical and creative approach. Then to start reflecting on what's this research creation process in particular and how it's translated on this cultural bridging on Hock and Puma. to talk more about positionality tools and collaborators plus cultural consulting on how this process has been in particular, and then to show some of the some insights on the final game and also the further retribution and collaboration. So, research in creation. In theory, and here we're in a space, in a making space, and everyone that have had like any approach or relation with the creative endeavor in general, we know that we're supposed to include research at some point in our creative process, right? So in theory, we always start like with a beginning or with a first idea. What are like our starting drives or motivations when we want to create something? Then we would have ideally a research work where we are going to go over the concept. We're going to look for references for our design. If it's a commercial project or we wanted to think about it like in an ecosystem where there are like other projects slash products that must be taken in account, like we are going to use probably a benchmark of those other projects. So there are like many ways that this research can happen, but ideally this would be a phase in every creative process, right? And then this is like the regular process, making like a huge generalization. Then we will follow to a consolidation phase where testing, iterations, leveraging the different aspects of the project are it's fundamental. And then, of course, the other 200% of looking for funding, the full production of the game, and once you put it out there, hoping the best for your baby and or your creation or the project where that you've been participating in for a lot of time, right? So research will be a fundamental part in theory, in some part of the process on every creative experience. However, in this experience, and what I wanted to share, because as a game designer, but also as a game researcher, I've been thinking about how to approach to this idea of the research plus the creation as part of the same process, but where research is a fundamental aspect of our game. And I don't think that this only relates to projects that have to deal with even like educational or cultural or other um, specific spheres or themes, but it's like a framework, a creative framework on how we approach to creation. And with that said, this is not the only approach to research creation. This is just some insights of my own experience that I wanted to share through this research creation process. So in this case, the research it's the starting step. So, as I mentioned, I'm doing a PhD on cultural studies where I'm researching Latin American game design and production and indigenous participation in the game production in Latin America. And something that I've noticed on one hand is that there's just a few experiences where indigenous peoples and communities have been part of the game creation side, and even less in Latin America. Because first, if we think on America, the whole American continent, there's just a few. Fortunately, there's more, especially in North America, the US, and in Canada, or the territories that collide with the communities that are still living there. But in Latin America, it's much challenging to find those examples. So that's part of the research. And while doing this, also, I found this awesome and incredible work that I'm going to be talking more, that it's one man. So stay with me. This is my own research creation process. So I've been researching this. This is my first step. So first, when we do this, we need to think that we have some academic drives, some theoretical approaches, some standpoints that are important to acknowledge when we're starting to create a game. So that's the research in this process. Then we also need to think about the desired outcomes. In this case, since it's like more research on academic spaces related, something important is outreach or the impact and the potential educative um, like potential of this project. So the desired outcomes will be like those, and we need to think about. So once we know what do we want to do, then we are going to go to what is the creation phase. And on the creation phase, when we're dealing with projects like this that usually are not following the quote like traditional commercial creation commercial projects, we are going to consider and leverage other things, like, for example, skills, the theoretical balance, and the format. Like in this case, it's not that I have, or most of the time, I don't have like a huge bag of money to create projects like I would think when I'm doing even like a small indie project where I know that I'm going to spend some months, years working on a certain project. But I need to consider the skills that I have available to try to create an experience like the one that I want to convey through this research with a creation outcome, but not as just like two different steps, but this is like a cycle that always it's in dialogue with the previous and further steps. So it's like I want to show that this is important, but it's not the same approach on research when we are doing like traditional creation, right? The other key thing on this creation is to think about our theoretical balance. So when we are doing games and we are like really passionate about narrative or some aspect that we've been researching about, like mechanics or some like trend that we want to add into our game, in the case of the research creation on this perspective, we need to really consider the theoretical balance, because theories are as huge as universes and worldviews. So it's impossible to put everything into a specific creation. And the same thing happens if we think in academic dimensions, like if you want to write a book or you want to write an article, you need to do a theoretical balance, and you could put a full theory, because not even theories are something that are just like easy to understand, or they have just one phase. Sometimes theories have like internal contradictions or different voices and perspectives inside those frameworks. So theoretical balance, it's what it's important for me to add into this creation, so my desired outcome may be achieved in a way that for me is meaningful. And here then comes the format. And in the format, it's okay. If I know the skills that what I have, or the people that it's around me that can work on experiences like this with me, and then I know what I want to add theoretically into my projects. The format is important. In this case, we are using minimal approach, but we could use like probably assets available on a particular game engine store, or we can try to do something from scratch, but pretty simple, and everything is going to be depend on the resources that we have available. But in general, research and creation are key things along this process. And then we would have the fourth step, that it's the same, and it's like the same that we would have on the traditional creation endeavor, where we also need to do the other 200%, where it's the funding, the production, and of course, once you put it out there, you also are going to be hoping for the best, right? Now let's come to this specific like the source, like source book and the source work that I've been using for this research creation. And in this case, it's the life and work of Felipe Guamán Poma de Ayala. Guamán Poma, or Felipe Guamán Poma de Ayala, was an indigenous chronicler of the Andes. So the Andes, in case that you're not that aware, so the America, because you already know that America is a continent, and there's the US, that it's one country inside the full American continent. And in the southern part of the continent, we have a mountain range called the Andes. And on the high parts of the Andes, there of South America, there was an empire, the Inca Empire, that they were not just one unified people, there were many peoples, like the Quechua, the Aymara, and more. And the Inca were the ruling class and the elite of this empire. And Guaman Poma was born in the 1600s, or the 1500s till the 1600s, and he was a chronicler. Let's think that Waman was a figure that he was born like right after that the colonial rule took out the Inca and they started the colonization of the region. Like the colonization started at the end of the 1400s, right? But in the Caribbean, let's think that it took decades to be able to defeat the Inca empire in the Andean region. And it's a pretty high region, like more than 3,000 meters height, so the oxygen works differently. Like there are many factors to have in mind, but in this case, let's think in Waman. He was a chronicler. He learned Spanish. He was taught by Jesuits, priests, and it's a pretty interesting figure because he was a chronicler and he was also like an indigenous noble, a nobleman in that time. So he had some privileges that other indigenous peoples didn't have. For example, he learned how to write because he was taught by Catholic priests, and with that, he then started to travel along the Inca region to to document the social injustices that the colonial rule were inflicting into the indigenous peoples of the region. And also, it's Felipe Guamán Poma de Ayala, Felipe, the first name. Guamán Poma de Ayala would be like the last names, and Guamán Poma are the totemic names. And Guamán means hawk, and Poma comes from puma, or like mountain lion. So that's why also the game it's called Hawk and Puma in as a homage for Guamán Poma de Ayala. Now, Guamán Poma, it's a super crazy historical figure. Like Waman, in this time, he wrote a letter, and this is like really important to think, like a letter of 1,000 pages, like 1,180 pages, and almost 400 illustrations, like hand-drawn illustrations made with ink, okay, and denouncing the abuses and the injustices of the colonial regime over the indigenous peoples of the region. So it's like crazy to think that this it's a letter that took more than 10 years to be written, that implied like Waman traveling and walking and trying to survive on this colonial rule where he was working also as a translator in this region. And that's why he spoke like Spanish, like that 16th century Spanish that it's like pretty old if we compare with the current versions of and different variants of Spanish. And also it has a lot of words in Quechua, some interferences with other local languages like Aymara. Also, Quechua it's an indigenous language, but it's also a people that it's like alive, but it's also threatened at this point. But fortunately, like it's still being spoken, but it's different on the Quechua that was spoken at that time. Okay, and it's important to think that this book of 1,000 pages, 400 hand-drawn illustrations, like again, it's titanic what woman was doing at that time. And this book was a letter addressed to the King Philip III from Spain. So this is an indigenous chronicler that at that time there were like doubts if they were people and all the Catholic imposition on this context. Like this is a person that it's like like taking the courage to writing a letter to the king from Spain at that time. Okay, so it's a crazy work. It's a crazy endeavor that he started and that he continued again more than 10 years. And it's crazy because this manuscript, this letter was lost for centuries. Somehow, Waman was able to take this letter to the viceroy, to like the authority representing the king in the region, in that part of South America, and but the letter was lost and we don't have a clue if the letter actually got to the King Philip III or what happened. What we know is that in the beginning of the 1900s, a German scholar in the Royal Danish Library found a French book. Again, a letter of 1,000 pages, 400 hand-drawn illustrations made with ink, and this was like a super strange specimen with this kind of illustration that you can see there. It's kind of similar or like medieval or Renaissance inspired, but with some elements that were like from here and from these like mixed cultures that woman was embodying. Okay, this letter was then rediscovered, and it took like 20 years to understand that first. Okay, this was a text from the Americas. Then, this was a letter addressed to the king, and that was written by an indigenous chronicler of the time, and that those words that they were not able to understand, besides the old strange Spanish concepts, were words in indigenous languages from the Andean region. Okay? And this letter, it's called Nueva Corónica y Buen Gobierno, or the first New Chronicle and Good Government. And it's a work that advocated for this good government that would combine the Inca paradigm on socio-political and economical structures with European technologies that were valued by the people, and some pretty useful tools and systems that they consider that could merge together to create and to foster a more just society. And also with this super strange aspect that is the Christian theology that adapted to the needs of the Andean people. There are interesting theories. Some of them said that maybe Waman actually was someone that was taught on these two worldviews at the same time. The Andean Inca encompassing worldview and perspectives of the peoples of the region with uh, the Christian theology, because in this letter there are different parts. One part it's about myth, it's about origin, it's about all that stuff, but combining the Andean perspective with the Catholic worldview. So it's like a pretty interesting piece, and it's free and available online in the Royal Danish Library site. So I really encourage you to go and check it out because it's fascinating. But also, there are other theories that may think that actually Waman was like a pretty witty person, in the sense that maybe he was using this argument that the indigenous peoples were already Christians, but he stated that this in the letter, but maybe as a strategy to try to be as persuasive as possible with the king. Of course, this probably was naive for some perspectives, but it's like pretty interesting to think about someone that is living in this side of the world, addressing a letter to someone that it's part of a really different world that he doesn't even know or like have experienced before, right? So that's why, and I'm sorry if I overextended in this part, but incredible what Waman did. So his figure it's like deeply fascinating, but also his work, it's a remarkable piece, and it's one of the best well preserved pieces and like visual narrative pieces of the Americas. So it's like I was like really fascinated, and once like I I I knew about this work, I really felt that I needed to do something with this, and that's why I said, okay, I need to do something with La Nueva Crónica. And to do this, I was using some theoretical framework. And I'm not going to be fair with the theory because I just have like some time, and this is just a talk, and I don't want to over theorize in this case. But the colonial thought, it's an intellectual movement or intellectual stream that basically help us to think as colonization as the particular event that happened at the end of the 1400s, and it's an event that then started to happen in more regions, right? Where the colonizers from Europe came to the now called American continent, um, taking and colonizing the indigenous peoples of the region. Then colonialism as a process, as an ongoing process that it's going on, that it's happening till this day, and we can notice some those processes that are going where there's like dispossession of lands, dispossession of culture, and many impositions to not only to the indigenous peoples but also to establish the coloniality that will be the structures that till this day gives them power to a certain specific like kind of people that have been holding the power, or the people that gives credit to those structures are only able to challenge and to try to get like those powers into those structures. And so the colonial theory, it's a transformational and reframing paradigm. So it's not something that it's trying uh, to to use exactly everything that we have and then just to add like a different goal. It's inviting us to rethink and to reframe history, to reframe thought, to reframe language, and all the different structures that are like under our like most naturalized principles. So that's why decolonization is a structural transformation. And I know, and there's like an academic trend on decolonization where everything seems to or needs seems it's like needs to be decolonial. But sometimes when everything becomes decolonial, we stop thinking about like the importance on really addressing the coloniality on their structures and the colonialism in the process. So it's like thinking about the coloniality and not addressing the genocide that the Israeli government is perpetrating to the Palestinian people, or the terrible colonization that the Russian Empire is imposing to the Ukrainian people. Like we can't be the colonial just in theory, because the colonial it's a movement, it's a thought, and it's a commitment also. And the positionality is fundamental when we are thinking on this kind of perspective. If no, we're just like like academic puns, like taking theories just to publish some things that may that to receive some applauses, instead of really trying to commit with those marginalized people and trying to transform those structures. And that's why some thinkers are Aníbal Quijano, Enrique Dussel, Walter Mignolo, but the most important one for me in this research creation process have been Silvia Rivera Cusicanqui. Silvia Rivera Cusicanqui is a Bolivian sociologist that she coined a concept that it's teje. It's an Aymara concept for spotted. I know that when we read it, it's like hard to say, but believe me, at least what I've been trying to understand is that it's pronounced queje. Okay, since as she pronounced it. Of course, this is not perfect. There are some sounds that I'm not able to pronounce properly, so I really apologize about that. But the important thing is that this is like a spotted. It's like a stained concept. And it's an invitation. So this is a concept that it's articulated based also on the work of Waman Poma, to think like how Waman was spotted. He wasn't just like indigenous. He wasn't just someone that was like taught by a Catholic priest. So then he's like a one more Catholic. Like it's and it's not like he's either one or zero. He's not either indigenous or European. He's not black or white. The Cheche concept and this spotted approach and the framework, it's to help us to understand that people are stained, and it's not black and white, so then we have grays in between. It's not just one line where we're in some point of the gradient. We are spotted, we have different things, and we have those contradictions. And it doesn't matter where you are, like all of us are spotted at some point. Like all of us have our contradictions. We can be talking about this, but also there's like a huge colonial history on game making, and also like where do these like materials are extracted and how. And there are like many things and contradictions that we may have. And I don't want to expose anyone in this space besides like my reflections or even my own, just as an example on how to approach to this for it. It's like I'm from Latin America, but also it's like I have I'm white coated in Chile. And also, I know some stories about ancestors from Europe, but I know that I have ancestors, indigenous ancestors from America, but all the stories are like gossips, long forgotten histories that were treated with shame. And fortunately, like now we're like everyone, or like there's like a more a tendency to be more aware and proud about those like erased legacies. So and it's not only about blood, and this is important. It's also about like how we are in the world. Like Waman was an indigenous noble person. That means some things. That brings some spots on his own profile and personality and like world paradigm. And he also was taught as by Catholic priests, so he learned Spanish, he learned about Catholic religion, and he knew about like some Quechua and Aymara and like many things that inside us we have like a huge contradiction. And always there's a contradiction when we assume that we are cheje, that we are spotted, that we are stained. Instead of trying to say, no, I'm going to resolve this contradiction, this is an invitation to think that all of us are spotted. And that doesn't mean that we are, oh, okay, that's the only answer. But it's easier to do something once we recognize those spotted aspects of ourselves. And it's an invitation also to give voice and to give space to those spotted, to those spots that have been erased with more strength, to try to bring them and to try to build like a more human, or a more not even human, like a more balanced way of life, not only with the human but also with the non-human and the whole ecosystem that makes possible for our lives to thrive and to exist, right? With that said, again, let's go back to Hawk and Puma. So we know who Woman is, we know what's this theoretical framework, and that's how this research creation process becomes something really, really, really concrete. So while doing this, I had a return to materiality, a return to think about what I'm using, how these, like all those works have been made. First of all, we have ink. And the ink, it's the based material, the based materiality that Waman was using. And it's pretty interesting if we think that this ink was something that was provided by the same priests of the colonizer uh, human group that was there, the ones that were trying to erase their culture and their language. But he managed to use this colonial tool that was used to write contracts that stole lands for many, many people. He used the same ink to document the abuses that the colonizers were inflicting to the indigenous peoples, but also he drew and he wrote about myths, daily life, government, and many, many, many other things. So this is a pretty interesting thing to have in mind, that it was a key inspiration when I was approaching to this research creation. Okay, I took ink as one of the key aspects. Then we have weaving and the weave. And weave, it's really important for the Andean cultures. Till this day, weaving is one of the practices that have survived the colonization and that have been sustaining communities and communitary ways of life. And Waman knew, and he documented, Waman drew and wrote a lot about weaving. And he drew like the weaving in happy ways, like here where people is weaving in like as part of the daily life, but also he drew like how the colonizers attacked the weaving practice, and knowing like how attacking the cultural practices that sustain this social fabric, like literally the social fabric, it was a way to impose their culture and um, stole their principles, or try to stole their principles and their land. So weaving became a huge metaphor for me. And after doing this research and this research creation, now it's really hard to me, and I don't want to leave this point, because now the metaphor of weaving have become a super important aspect on creation, but also on how we relate with others, because always there's others in our work. So weaving, it's a a community practice, a community practice. It's not something that it's that just one person does by itself, by themselves. Something that we do in community, and this keeps the community together. So that's why for me it was fundamental, and it appeared on woman's work, and it was okay. I really need to embrace this materiality of the weave. And finally, the pixels. The pixels as this like basic structure that projects the light that allow us to be sharing here in this hybrid digital modality. But also pixels are material. It's not just the light projected on the screens that we use and the devices that are all around us. And it's the materiality that video games, as something that have this video component projected on screens, uses. And I wanted to take them like pretty serious as I'm using ink. The width, the pixels, it's also part of this key fabric that I want to think about and to weave everything and all this together. And as you can see, we have on the first image a Waman illustration. Then we have the weave of these Waman illustrations, but turned into this pixel version on Bitsy. And then we have the pixels that it's like it was fascinating to notice how these three things started to become something as a whole and something all together, because the Bitsy engine, that it's the one that I'm using, that it's a minimal tool and an awesome beautiful tool, uh, allowed me with their own limits to kind of be weaving these images. So even I use like real Inca patterns. I use like patterns by Inca in the north of Chile, because I'm from Chile, and I wanted to interweave also part of my own story into this approach on doing this research creation, because it's also personal. But here you can see how this research creation helped me to think and to reflect into achieve like this minimal, but in my perspective and experience, like powerful approach to creation and research. And that's why the positionality is important. Like I mentioned, I'm from Chile, like this long, thin, and weird looking country in the south of America, of the whole American continent, because you know, America, it's a continent, and this is Chile. This is the region. So the Andes goes from here till here. So it's like a huge mountain range in this part. And the Inca Empire were here, like Peru, Bolivia, the north of Chile, Ecuador. So it was a huge region, and the the region where woman was around this area. Okay, probably you have heard about Machu Picchu, that it's like around here, and it's one of the testaments of this huge civilization that were the Incas, and that those peoples are still alive, not as an Inca empire, but there are like Quechua people and Aymara people and many indigenous communities are still alive and keeping those traditions. But it's important to notice that I'm from Chile, and I grew up in Punta Arenas, like in this particular place in the southernmost part of the continent. And then I grew up in Valparaiso, not pretty close to the Inca region, but I was like pretty fond into Andean culture and Andean music, and it's like pretty influential in Chile. But it's important to acknowledge that I'm not exactly from there. Then the ethical and political standpoint, it's something that probably you already have noticed because I've been talking a lot about that, but it's important to know and to state my own positionality when doing this. And also my third uh, fundamental aspect in this research creation was that my stand against the myth of the solo dev, like in particular in the game industry and the game culture, there's this huge myth of the solo dev that it's like toxic and pernicious narrative that makes no favor to creators and to people that are passionate with this medium. So if we think about those games that were made by solo people, we always, if we dig deep, we always are going to find unrecognized labor of other people. that that made those games possible. From like all of us that have been doing games for years knows that we maybe had like this idea that it's like our baby, and suddenly someone, a friend or a tester, gave us like one insight that maybe change maybe one brick, but that brick changed the whole philosophy about our games, about our creation. So it's like it's important to acknowledge this for the good of future generations of creators. Okay, so this is something that I had in mind. And why? Because I started making this game alone, like as a solo dev, as a solo research creation, with the support of my team. That they gave me like a window, like a bubble of time. Okay, Nico, go for it. Do this research creation that is published as Niebla. So they gave me space because my team was helping me doing other jobs, other things, and also like the who made the tools, who made the language, etc. There are like many things going on. But here, just one key is that while thinking about my own tensions, and again the Cheche concept, this stained, spotted, like I wanted to bring those contradictions that I have as a creator too into the game somehow. So I wanted to put Waman as an indigenous figure in contrast with the Western conceptions of power and government. And this is something that the research creation brought something like pretty spicy into the game. And it was the speculative dialogue between Waman Poma and Niccolo Machiavelli. And this is crazy because while doing this research and when doing this PhD, that it's also a privileged space to do research, but then I needed to turn it into creation. Like from the beginning, like thinking about these ideas and digesting the concepts, um, I came with this strange relation. So it's crazy because Waman's probable birth was around 4 years after Niccolo Machiavelli's probable death. So they were like pretty close. If we think in time as a line, they were like pretty close in pretty close points in that line. However, of course, they were from pretty different temporalities and world paradigms. But that's like a crazy relation. Then both are figures of transition. Waman was in living the transition of the declining of the Inca Empire on hands of the European colonizers, and and also like seeing how the indigenous world, as he uh, knew it, was changing to this like new kind of colonial regime. And Niccolo Machiavelli is a figure of transition to the modern states. So from like those kind of polis, like big cities that there were in the now Italy, the transition to the then like modern states that closer to the ones that we know in like nowadays. And also, both are figures that were written and are addressing their work to the nobility, to the crown. Waman was writing to the King Philip III. In Machiavelli's work, the most famous one, it's called The Prince, because was also addressed to the nobility, in this case to Lorenzo de' Medici, but both were writing to the crown. And also, both, like Nueva Crónica y Buen Gobierno means like the new chronicle and good government, and The Prince, it's all about good governance. It's all about sovereignty. Both are about religion, about power. So that was like a crazy connection that was possible only because of this research creation commitment to the process to see like those crazy relationships that we may establish that not only are like useful for the process and for the work itself, but also are productive to their own like for learning and to understand and for understanding, like even for like the development of knowledge and thought, like how we can put these two figures together and how we can put them in play together. So that's why Waman it's the key figure and the protagonist of this game, but also we find Maki, that it's this specter that came with the colonizers and it's a lost spirit that incarnates Western conceptions of power, and it's always like questioning woman's motivations, questioning woman's ways and strategies, trying to impose the Western conception to him till he's just bored about woman, and woman continues his work till the end of the game. This is a 15-minute game. It's a pretty short game, but it's like uh, pretty dense in content. Um, and also against the myth of the solo dev, like that was part of my own positionality, my own standpoint, but also my stand against the solo myth, the myth of the solo dev. It's because I only was able to work on this version, on like the prototype of the game, thanks to the work of other people. And that's why I want to acknowledge and to thank Adam Ledoux, the creator of Bitsy, the little engine for little games, words, and stories, and all the people that have contributed to the existence of a project as beautiful as this one, and like other members of the community that have developed these tools, these open source tools for other people to go and play with them and make awesome and cool things. Like I've used Borgsy from Ayoland, Bitsy Savior from Aloe La Zoe. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing. English is not my first name, and I don't know if those are like all of those are in English. Pixie by Ruin, Bitsy Muse by David Mowat, Bitsy Color by Auri System, and more tools. There's one Signal, a MIDI online composer that I used to create the Andean inspired soundtrack, the Waman song, that it's the one that we listen along the game. And these tools were made me able to make this. That this is one of the key things, and that for some people that are closer to Woman's work, they were really impacted, and even people that didn't know about Woman, it's like how these tools and the work of other people made possible for the game, and I was one of the key persons working on this, but to use woman's work, to use woman's illustrations, to turn them into pixels, into this mini minimalist version of the illustrations, but that are also like pretty compelling, that evocates this weaving feeling through this pixelated aesthetic on the game. So no one makes a game by itself. And acknowledging that, I decided that I wanted to go further with the prototype. That's how we started a meaningful collaboration that started with a shy cultural consulting, because when we are working on cultures that are not our own, and Waman's work so, works like it's about Latin America and the whole complex story of our peoples, and I identify with that, and it like dig deep in my own self, and that's why I really needed to create this work. But I knew that this is not exactly from where I am, and there are like many invisible people in those regions, and I really wanted to do something about it for the same also things that I've been researching in my own work. And that's how I started with this Chai cultural consultation. That's how I met Kenia Chavez Caguana, who was born in the Sacred Valley of the Incas in a Quechuan Andean background in Cusco, Peru, or PISAC. He was a member of the indigenous collective at the University of Chile. She belongs to the Ñaupañán community in Cusco, Peru, and is currently collaborating with the Anumcan Space Foundation in Santiago, Chile. And then, thanks to Kenya, we started a collaboration with Cesar Sicos Yucra, born in the Sacred Valley of the Incas in Cusco with a family background in Quechua speakers. He's a trilingual tourism guide fluent in Quechua, Spanish, and Portuguese. He belongs to the Ñaupañán community in Cusco, Peru, and is currently pursuing his studies in English. And also Jessica Sicos Yucra, who was born in the Sacred Valley of the Incas in Cusco with a family background of Quechua speakers. She is currently completing her higher education in bilingual intercultural primary education. So these cultural consultants became a collaboration with them, and we started working together. And because I didn't want to stay, oh, I'm doing this game by myself first, because ethically was something that I really needed to know that for me the game was like a whole, not only as a result but also in the process. And then also was the opportunity to do something that went beyond to what I was expecting, and it was being able to launch this minimal game in Quechua in Spanish and in English. This was a huge step and a milestone in what we have done. There's not many games in Quechua out there, so this was huge, and it was like a pretty compelling, and it's something that we're proud of as a team. And we started thinking of us as a team, and the opportunities that doing it allow us to go further. And that's how, thanks to them, we started a collaboration with the Cusicausay Andean School. It's an Andean association rooted on indigenous knowledge, more close to the Quechua knowledge, with inspiration on Waldorf methodology. So it serves to indigenous and local youth, and also to people from outside that would like to join a space rooted in this. And that's how we started a further collaboration. And this further collaboration became a project called Andean Futures. And it's on an ongoing project. I just came back from Peru last week. We started this project with Kenya, that you can see her here, Jesse and Cesar, or Ispu. These are the collaborators that we work together for Hock and Puma. And then also with Magda joined our team, and we started to make these Andean futures. Here is Señora Lucia, a lovely weaver, and who is also the professor of weaving in the school, and her father. So those are pictures of like 2 weeks ago, where we were starting these ludic workshops with youth and using these same tools. So now the step was, instead of just me coming from outside, but having like a deep relation on Waman's work as a Latin American person and creator and artist, and also as an academic, like talking about how the barriers are so high when we think about making games in marginalized spaces, like the intersection of indigenous communities and Latin America. It was like we should do something. That's how, with Kenya, Jesse, and Ispu or Cesar, we said, let's do something beyond. And we designed this project called Andean Futures, where youth from those communities are learning how to create their own minimalist games using Bitsy. Through this collaborative approach, we were able to do some analog game design exercises to then try to leverage the challenges on working on spaces like this. So we they were supposed to have Wi-Fi, but it really isn't a thing. We had like a water shortage and electrical shortage, so we were like really trying to do our best with those resources. Uh, Kenya, Jesse, and Ispu are from the community, so that was like awesome, and it was like key to make this possible. And it's only possible because we're working as a team. And here you can see like we were like sharing resources, and it was a beautiful experience. And it's the first version. So in the future, I hope to probably here or in other spaces be sharing more about this Andean Futures project. This is just the first glimpse of what we've been doing. So we have like really simple exercises, but games after all. We have also like really personal and moving stories that I can't expand here now, but if I found a space to do it in the future, I would love to, in 1 or 2 years, come here and share like how this experience had been transformational for us, but also for them. And it's a pretty meaningful first example of also local stories, like how they relate with like animals from the region, from llamas or lamas, from the region with the sun, with Intihuatana, and some like elements of the local narratives that it was possible through these like days of workshop with these youth and different groups that were joining us. We had to bring also computers. They had some, but we managed to be able to teach more than 30 people about game design and the potential of games on bridging cultures, not only when talking about people, not only talking with, but also the potentials when we help and we are like promoters and we make our grain of sand to help other peoples also to understand the potential and to open the game design for new and more voices. So with that said, thank you so much for your attention. And you can find Hog and Puma on each. It's free and open. You can find it there. So again, thank you so much to everyone in the Hand-Eye Society. Thank you, Jordan, who was such a kind person helping me to set up everything. And I hope you keep enjoying the fest. Yes.
Sage's skin breaks out with beads of sweat. They trail down her hairline. Her body tells her to be on high alert. Sage feels like a presence is eyeing her. Yet when she turns to look around, there's not another person in sight.
Oh my fucking god!
A trash can had fallen down.
Oh, calm down, Sage. It's nothing.
As Sage turns to the left, she glances at the prone form of what is actually a person. Before she can get a good look, something blurs past her and latches onto her right hand with a sickening crunch. Naomi injects Sage with the serum. A few seconds pass and nothing happens until...
Fuck! It burns! It burns, Naomi!
Fuck, what? What is happening? Naomi and Sage watch in horror as the creature eats away at what's left of Sage's hand and starts moving up her arm. Sage's flesh wriggles and drops to the floor.
You're on a path in the woods, and at the end of that path is a cabin. And in the basement of that cabin is a princess. You're here to slay her.
Wait, what?
If you don't, it will be the end of the world.
Now hold on a second. Don't you listen to him. What did I ever do to you?
She will do everything in her power to stop you.
Well, yeah. I don't want to die.
She'll charm and she'll lie and she'll promise you the world, and if she has the chance, she will kill you 12 times over.
Is he even listening to me?
Don't forget, the fate of the world rests on your shoulders.
You're not actually going to try and slay me or anything, right? Because I wouldn't if I were you.
If you try, I'll kill you as many times as it takes.
Phew, what an amazing day of talks. Thanks to all the speakers, exhibitors, and everyone who tuned in to watch. I hope you got interested in more games and learned something along the way. But Super Festival is not done yet. We're here all 7 days from November 25th to December 1st, and there's still plenty more festival to go. Be sure to check out our special Super Festival website for more information about the exhibited games, our speakers, our stream schedule, our upcoming online workshops, and more. Also, if you're in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, be sure to see our map to check out the Tron arcade machines throughout the city, and join us this Saturday at the Hand-Eye Society Ball. Once again, a huge shout out to our amazing sponsors. Thank you to Ontario Creates, the City of Toronto, the Province of Ontario, the Toronto Arts Council, the Ontario Arts Council, and the Canada Council for the Arts, as well as our studio sponsors Clever Endeavor and Stella Maris. Well, that's all for today. We'll be back tomorrow with more talks and games. Thank you for watching, everyone, and I'll see you tomorrow.